Be with me, Lord, and then if dangers threaten, if storms of pride.
In no small part because my confusion and uncertainty remains. Quote, 3/4 of the factors on which action in war are based are wrapped in a fog of greater or lesser uncertainty, and discriminating judgment is called for, a skilled intelligence to scent out the truth. Karl von Clausewitz. First known use of this exact phrase in a text was in 1836 in a poem entitled The Battle of Bunker Hill. Will they dare a third attack? Is a question seen in every eye. Oh, put across the neck and back, rises slowly their vengeance to defy. Wildly, in that deadly hour, the ramparts shove their bolted shower, while midst the waving fog of war, thunders the Yankees' loud hurrah. Now, chapter 27, the Philistines are at war with Israel. As the sitting king of Israel, Saul is at war with the Philistines. David, as the anointed king of Israel, is at war with the Philistines. And Saul is at war with his anointed replacement, David, and continues his efforts to kill him. And David takes refuge with the enemy, the Philistine stronghold. With conflict everywhere, how do we understand David's actions in chapter 27? Is David acting as God's agent of justice and punishment? Or is David acting in his own interest in order to satisfy his own lust, desires, and needs? Let's read through these 12 verses quickly. Then David said to himself, now I will perish one day at the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than to safely escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will despair of searching for me anymore in all that territory, in all the territory of Israel, and I will escape from his hand. So David set out and went over, he and the 600 men that were with him, to Achish, the son of Malach, king of Gath. And David lived with Achish in Gath, he and his men, each with his own household. David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the Carmelitess, Nabal's widow. Now, as reported to Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he no longer searched for him. Now, David and his men went up to Then David said to Achish, if now I have found favor in your sight, have them give me a place in one of the cities in the country, so that I may live there. Why should your servant live in the royal city with you? So Achish gave him Ziklag that day. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. The number of days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. Now he and his men went up and attacked the Jezreelites, the Gersites, and the Amalekites, for they were the inhabitants of the land from ancient times, as you come to Sur, even as far as the land of Egypt. And if you want to read on the board, you need the verse. David attacked the land and did not leave a man or a woman alive. And he took the sheep and the cattle and the donkeys and the camels and the clothing. Then he returned to Achish. Now Achish said, where did you carry out an attack today? And David said, against the Negev of Judah, against the Negev of the Jerahmeelites, against the Negev of the Kenites. And David did not leave a man or woman alive to bring to Gath, saying, otherwise they will tell about us, saying, this is what David has done. And this has been practice all the time that he was lived in the country of the Philistines. So Achish believed David, saying, he has undoubtedly made himself repulsive among his people Israel. Therefore, he will become my servant forever. And there's that which we just read. Now this brings back questions that we had last time. In a time of war, are all social norms and conventions of polite society suspended? In time of war, are all of God's commandments suspended? In view of his actions, how can David be considered a man after God's own heart? And what can we learn? It may be that out of the fog of war, some moments crystallize into absolute clarity. But in general, there must be an enormous amount of fear, confusion, stress, doubt, and uncertainty. 27 verse 1, then David said to himself, now I will perish one day at the hand of Saul. Well, one way to look at that is it was advice from an advisory committee of 3, me, myself, and I. And he came to the conclusion that in this moment of fatigue and frustration and weakness, things seem to be crystal clear, at least to David, that he cannot be safe while within reach of Saul, even though he's been anointed as God's choice to replace Saul. Further in verse 1, there is nothing better for me than to safely escape to the land of the Philistines. Now this is a classic Machiavellian move. Cunning, manipulative, cynical, disregarding morality, focused on self-interest. Again in verse 1, then Saul will despair of searching for me any more in all the territory of Israel, and I will escape from his hand. Now David, ever the man of action, having devised his own clever plan for survival, makes his move. In verse 2, quote, so David set out and went over, he and the 600 men who were with him, to Achish. Achish the son of Molech came of Gath, and David lived with Achish in Gath, he and his men, and each in their own household. The names again, and now it's reported to Saul that David had left Gath, so he no longer searched for him. Safe at last, in the bosom of his arch enemy. I suppose the enemy of my enemy is my friend, is basically the rule that everyone is operating under here. And David lived with Achish in Gath, he and his men, each with his own household. But now David finds himself in a condition which he did not desire. Now let's look back at chapter 26, verses 19 and 20. Now then, please let my lord the king listen to the words of his servant. If the Lord has incited you against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is people, cursed are they before the Lord, because they have driven me out today, so that I would have no share in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. Unquote. And David felt compelled, for the safety and well-being of himself, his family, his followers and their family, to move to the only country which moved from the only country that worshiped the true God into a country of pagans and idol worshippers. Now, when I read this, I thought, remind me of a little story. Those of you who are about my age, especially if you grew up in this state, think back for a minute to when you were a kid, maybe just turning a teenager. What was your weekend like? Well, Saturday, you cut the grass. In the evening, you sit and watch the Flat and Scruggs show, brought to you by Martha White's Rising Flower, on the black and white TV, while shining your shoes so they would look nice for church on Sunday. Now, Sunday morning, get up, dress up, go to church. Now, the blue laws meant that almost every business was closed so that everyone could go to church. So you go home after church to eat the pot roast that your mother put on earlier that day, or maybe late Saturday. Maybe the preacher's family came to have lunch with you, or another family from church, or maybe visitors who showed up at church. Bring them home to have lunch with you. After lunch, sit on the porch and talk till time to go back to church. But times have changed. Part of that change, we voted out a certain political party because we thought they were getting too liberal. But the way things look today, their conservative replacements are going to vote in a future that we never asked for. So thinking about all the things that are up in the air in our society today, I thought it may not be long until this is your typical weekend. Dad plays video games most of the day on Saturday. And then, in the evening, he goes out drinking at the newest bar/brewery. Then, near closing time, he connects with a free spirit there and spends the night with her. Or him, depending on his mood or how he identifies that day. Sunday morning, he sleeps late, then goes out for a breakfast burrito. Stops at the gas station for gas and a fistful of lottery tickets. Then it's on to the state-licensed cannabis store to refill his marijuana pouch before going on to the casino where he gambles away the mortgage payment, leaving his wife and children one more step closer to homelessness. And with that little imaginary story, I've got a question. Are we moving from a nation which worshiped and honored the true God? Are we moving to a nation of pagans and idol worshipers? Now, chapter 7, verse 4, quote, "Now it was reported to Saul that David had fled to Garth, so he no longer searched for him." Unquote. So, well, being ugly today. Okay. So, David's plan seems to have worked. But in so doing, the anointed king of Israel has placed himself in a subservient role to the pagan king of Israel's enemy. Now, verse 5 through 7, quote, "Then David said to Achish, 'If now I have found favor in your sight, have them give me a place in one of the cities in the country, so that I may live there. For why should your servant live in the royal city with you?' So Achish gave him Ziklag that day, and Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. The number of days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months." Unquote. Now David is some distance away from the king of Gath. He is free to move about as he wishes. So what does he do? Verse 8, quote, "Now David and his men went up and attacked the Geshurites, the Gersites, and the Amalekites, for they are the inhabitants of the land from the ancient times, as you come to Sur, even as far as the land of Egypt. David attacked the land and did not leave a man or woman alive. He took the sheep, the cattle, the donkeys, the camels, and the clothing. Then he returned and came to Achish. Now Achish said, 'Where did you carry out an attack today?' And David said, against the Negev of Judah, against the Negev of the Jerahmeelites, and against the Negev of the Kenites. And David did not leave a man or a woman alive to bring to Gath, saying, otherwise they will tell about us, saying, this is what David has done, and this has been his practice all the time that he was living in the country with the Philistines. Unquote. Now, what compelled David to undertake these extreme actions? Well, who were the Geshurites, the Gersites, and the Amalekites? This is another thing that I remain in fog about, because I found no definitive description of these people. I've got partial and some hints. I found this in the internet website Bible Hub, which I suspect some bias in some places, but this summary is typical of everything that I found. The Geshurites were a people group mentioned in the Old Testament, primarily associated with the region of Geshur, located in the northeast part of ancient Israel, near the Sea of Galilee. The Geshurites are first mentioned in the context of the land that the Israelites were to conquer. The Geshurites maintained a degree of autonomy and were not entirely driven out by the Israelites. The Gersites are a lesser-known group mentioned in the context of David's time among the Philistines, Samuel 27. David and his men conducted raids against Geshurites, Gersites, and Amalekites. Now, the Amalekites are one of the most frequently mentioned adversaries of Israel in the Old Testament. They are descendants of Esau's grandson, Amalek, as noted in Genesis 36 and 12. The Amalekites were a nomadic tribe inhabiting the southern region of Canaan, the Negev, and the Sinai Peninsula. The Amalekites first appear in biblical narrative during the Exodus, attacking the Israelites at Rephidim. Now it seems that David told Achish that he was raiding the Negev of Judah, home of the Israelites, but neglected to tell him that he was raiding inhabitants who were not Israelites, but were allies of the Philistines. Verse 12. So Achish believed David, saying, he has undoubtedly made himself repulsive among his people Israel, therefore he will become my servant forever. Unquote. Now David is good at deception. Is deception and lying approved of in great times of stress and the panic of war? There's a question. If there are conditions which affect the commandment, thou shalt not kill, are there conditions which affect thou shalt not bear false witness? There's another question. And one way to think of it, how much more death and destruction would the Nazis have brought to the world in the 1940s had the Normandy invasion not been successful? And how was it successful? Due in part to deception. There's a quote from D-Day Center. The elaborate deception campaign leading up to D-Day tricked German commanders into keeping 150,000 troops some 200 miles away in the wrong spot. Honestly, it stands out as one of the boldest military tricks ever pulled. The Allies pulled off this massive ruse by using fake armies, inflatable tanks, and double agents who spoon-fed Nazi intelligence false information for months before Operation Overlord kicked off. So deception, is it called for? Is it approved? Well, Well, no, don't want to do that yet. The following passage from Leviticus 18 will illustrate God's attitude toward sin and his attitude toward those who give themselves over to it, no matter who they may be. Leviticus 18, quote, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, where they lived, and you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan, to which I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. You shall follow my rules and keep my statutes and walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my rules. If a person does them, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. None of you shall approach." Now, I'm going to skip a few verses that give specifics about some of the sins and so forth and go on to verse 24. "Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, for by all these the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean. And the land became unclean, so that I punished it, its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall keep my statutes and my rules, and do none of these abominations, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For the people of the land who were before you did all these abominations, so that the land became unclean. Lest the land vomit you out when you make it unclean, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. For everyone who does any of these abominations, the person who do them shall be cut off from among their people. So keep my charge never to practice any of these abominable customs, and then practice before me, and never to make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God." And if you think about it, these abominations, these sins, sin is death. Sin is a separation from God. The wages of sin are death. So really, sin is death. Now, it's not God who brings about the death, but sin. So, was David executing God's righteous judgment and punishment when he led his group on these raids? Is David acting as God's agent of justice and punishment? Well, I couldn't find a verse anywhere that gave him that particular authority. So maybe the closest I came to it, one commentator said, David may not have realized it, but he was doing himself some good because he was cleaning out the country that he was to become king of. But I don't know. So, was he acting at God's direction and we don't know about it? Or I don't know about it? Or was David acting in his own interest in order to satisfy his own lusts and needs? And if you know the story of David, you know from time to time he did that. But let's discuss David's behavior for a moment. To do it, let's use an old behavioral structure that we've used before. The id, the ego, and the superego. Now, the id is the impulsive part of your psyche which responds directly and immediately to basic urges, needs, and desires. It receives information, raw data collected by the five senses. The ego develops to mediate between the unrealistic id and the external real world. It is a decision-making component of personality. Ideally, the ego works by reason, whereas the id is chaotic. And then the superego, your life's plan, your worldview, your prime directive, or the condition of your heart. What is your heart's desire? The superego incorporates the values and morals of society. It also has the function of persuading the ego to turn to moralistic goals. Now, with the structure in mind, I would suggest that we can gauge David's superego, his heart, his worldview, the condition of his heart, by what he has written in some 72, give or take, Psalms. For example, Psalm 63, David says, God, you are my God. I shall be watching for you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh yearns for you. In a dry and exhausted land where there is no water. So have I seen you in the sanctuary. I see your power and glory, because your favor is better than life. Psalms 95. Come, let's sing the joy of the Lord. Let's shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let's come before his presence with song of thanksgiving. Let's shout joyfully to him in songs with instruments. For the Lord is great God, the great King above all gods, in whose hand are the depths of the earth. The peaks of the mountain are also his. The sea is his, for it was he who made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Come, let's worship and bow down. Let's kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God. Unquote. David was a man of action, a man of great passions, fearless and always ready to face the giant. But at times, his superego, his worldview, his values and morals, the condition of his heart, did not keep his passions and impulses in check. At times, David's actions got ahead of his heart. Like Peter, his passions overcame his intentions, his good intentions. Like Paul, David needed to, quote, strictly discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I preach to others, I myself would not be disqualified. David lived in a very stressful time. He had great responsibilities. He lived under extreme pressure. He was a warrior. He lived in the fog of war when uncertainty and confusion led to deadly decisions. So if David's heart was right, if he was a man after God's own heart, yet often allowed his passions, his desires, his fears, his emotions to become the deciding factor and led him to do many profoundly evil things, why has God seen fit to share this information with us? Romans 5, for whatsoever was written in earlier times was written for our instruction, so that through perseverance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. Now may God, who gives perseverance and encouragement, grant you to be of the same mind as one another, fellowship with one another, according to Christ Jesus, so that with one purpose and one voice you may glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. A further insight into the complex nature of God, the book of Nahum, chapter 1. This is a pronouncement to Nineveh. A jealous and avenging God is the Lord. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserves wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. In the gale and in the storm of his way, the clouds are the dust beneath his feet. He remakes the sea and dries it up. He dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither. The blossoms of Lebanon wither. Mountains quake because of him, and the hills come apart. Indeed, the earth will upheaval by his presence, the world and all the inhabitants in it. Verse 6. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the burning of his anger? His wrath gushes forth like fire, and the rocks are broken up on him. But wait, verse 7. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows those who take refuge in him. Psalms 46, quote, God is our refuge and strength, a very ready help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth shakes and the mountains slide into the heart of the sea, though the waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake in its swelling pride. There is a river whose stream makes the city of God happy, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She will not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations may uproar, the nations tottered. He raised his voice, the earth quaked. The Lord of armies is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Come behold the works of the Lord, who has inflicted horrific events on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in two. He burns the chariots with fire. Stop striving, stop warring, and know that I am God. I will exalt among you the nations. I will be exalted on earth. The Lord of armies is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. So whatever David's motives might have been, his interactions with God can be very instructive. In John 14, Jesus said, verse 6, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on you know him and have seen him. Verse 15, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Unquote. Without rules, there's only chaos. Commandments from God should be taken seriously and obeyed, even in war or times of great stress. And should we find an exception, again, this is my opinion, and should we find an exception to one of God's rules, it would be a very dangerous game to try and stretch that exception, that qualification or loophole, to stretch it to make it larger than the rule. How can we claim an exception to a rule if we do not recognize that there is a rule and that rule should be obeyed? As an illustration here, actor, juggler, comedian W.C. Fields, he played a character maybe closely based on himself, who was a noted philanderer, drunkard, and atheist. Now, shortly before his death, he was hospitalized. And a visitor came into his room and was surprised to see Mr. Fields sitting on the edge of his hospital bed and reading a Bible. Mr. Fields, I thought you were an atheist. Why are you reading the Bible? I'm looking for loopholes, my friend, looking for loopholes. Now, if we are looking for loopholes, maybe we should check the condition of our hearts. So as we continue this study, I am sure that we will learn much more about David, his heart, his actions, his passions, his need for grace and forgiveness, his accomplishments, and his legacy. Now, take a breath. Comments, questions? Yes.
Would you think maybe God used David and not other men after God's own heart to make sure that his rule was clear of the coming of Christ and to take care of the enemies and the
Do we think that perhaps God used David to accomplish his goal and purposes, whether David knew it or not? Yes. I think that is definitely a possibility.
Because he knew, God, of course, God knew when Jesus was coming, and He had to make sure Israel was going to be ready for Him.
Yeah. Well, God used Cyrus, who was not a Jew or a worshiper of God, but He used him for to accomplish his goals. Very good, yes.
He called Nebuchadnezzar my servant.
Yeah. Yeah.
But David was a man of God, right?
Yes. That's a question. How does he do all these things if he's a man of God? Well, if he was doing it at God's command, then that was what should have been done. If he was doing it out of his own passions and desires and necessities of war or whatever, he needed some grace and some forgiveness. And that's what we seem to keep coming back to on David. David cared about doing the right thing and asked for repentance. Those Psalms they're begging for a relationship with God. So there are a lot of things he needed forgiveness for. And why does God share this with us? I mean, do we ever need forgiveness? Do we ever need grace? Does this country need forgiveness and grace?
Only daily.
What?
Only every day.
Only every day. Every hour.
Every hour.
Every minute. Yes. I think maybe that's going to be part of where we come to, is that we are human. We all need grace and forgiveness. Okay. Johnny? John? Whoever.